Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan, also known as the Medieval Genie, and today we're going to be talking about footwork in sword fighting. Now, initially it might seem irrelevant because, of course, the sword is in your hand, not stuck to your foot, or of course in both hands, but despite that, the fact is that it's important how well your body is structured behind it all. If you've got a poor body structure, even if your handiwork is perfect, you'll find yourself stumbling and clumsily attacking and defending somewhat weakly and poorly, despite having the same physical strength in a person, the same quality of the weapon that you're wielding. So, we're going to have a few different parts. I'm going to not go into sort of more intermediate things like the stable turn and those things today, especially since other people have covered those in their videos. However, I will talk about 4 different things. So we've got passing footwork, shuffle footwork, the lunge, and the slip. And I'll not only talk about how to physically do those things, I will also talk about tactically and strategically why it's worth doing those things as well. So firstly, we'll be looking at passing footwork. Now this is a more sort of medieval style of sword fighting. You see it a lot less in things like military sabre, but basically the concept is that whatever side your body is facing, usually following your sword, determines which foot is forward and which foot is backward, in a style where rather than having your feet sort of horizontal and level of each other like you're in a conversation with someone, being in a ready stance with one foot in front and one foot back actually structures you better to be able to more strongly start a swing, start an extending thrust, or engage in some sort of bind or parry with the other person's weapon. So, of course, for starters, I'm a right-handed person with a sword, as you've probably figured, so usually if I was doing some sort of sparring match or some sort of tournament, I'd start with the sword on my right. Now, that would mean that my body is sort of positioned that way, so I'm starting usually with my left foot forward and my right foot back, because I'm pointed off with my torso to my right, following the sword, which means that my right foot is actually behind me. Now, if I ended up with some sort of cut or thrust or parry or whatever action, perhaps even just being left-handed, I ended up on my left, then simply the opposite becomes the case. I have my right foot forward and my left foot back. Now, you should always bear in mind that regardless of whether you're left-handed or right-handed, whether you're using a sword in one hand or in 2 hands, you will at some point end up on both sides of the body, unless it's a very short exchange indeed. But when you've got your sword and your body pointing to your right, you should have your right leg back, and when your body and your sword are pointing off to the left, in whatever position, whether your sword is high or low, whether you've got the sword point forward, whether you've got it back, regardless, if you're off to your left, then your left foot should be back. And quite simply, as you're moving, it is pretty much like walking. You just put one foot in front of the other. It's nothing too fancy or complicated, but what's very important, and I'm going to stress here, is that as you cross from one side to the other, that you position your body behind it. What you don't want to do is to, for example, let's say I'm cutting from my left shoulder and I'm cutting across to my right. What I don't want to do is to keep kind of rigid, cut with my arms only, and notice, as you see here, because I haven't swapped my feet over and I haven't positioned my body, my left foot is back, my right foot is forward, my torso is pointing, and my body is pointing off to the left. However, I've tried to take my sword around to my right, so I can already feel it in my shoulders. I'm extending and I'm kind of stretching myself very awkwardly. And not only is it very uncomfortable, it also is quite weak. If I was trying to do something like a defense, let's say someone attacked from my right, from their left, so I'm trying to do a parry out here, because I'm not positioning my body behind it, it feels clunky, I've got less range of movement, and I'm also quite weak in this position. I've only got my arms to resist. I haven't got much of my body strength behind it. And actually this gets even worse if you're using a sword two-handed, because you'll feel your arm, one of your arms, stretching across your body way too much, and you can barely sort of reach the sword, let alone put some strength into it. And this applies the opposite way around as well. As you can see, not only does this look awkward, but I can tell you this also feels awkward. So by positioning your body behind it, you get a better cut. It makes a difference between, let's say we're back here on my right again, doing something like this, which is awkward and weak, and doing this. Notice I have crossed my body. Now I'll show you full body, that if you've got your whole body going across and you follow up with your feet, it also structures for the cuts, the thrusts, the parries, beating, whatever you wish to do. By positioning your body behind your action, you are helping yourself to do it more efficiently. You can do a stronger action despite having the same weapon in your hand, and despite having the same physical strength as a person. You're able to put much more into your actions, and for about the same amount of effort as well. It actually helps to make sword fighting less tiring as well. After that, we have shuffle footwork. Now, this is simply, rather than turning your body and swapping sides constantly, of course in real life people don't do that all the time, and sometimes they might have their body positioned one way, and it may well be, especially in military sabre, your sword is in front of you a lot of the time, in various guards, in attacks and defences, so hence you're not really following any particular side, so hence it doesn't matter quite so much if my body is pointing to my left or to my right. But you'll find typically, if you're doing something like military sabre, you've got your dominant foot forward and your body pointing off to the opposite side. So being right-handed, I'll have my body to my left, my right foot forward, and then I'll be doing a lot of things, not really swapping sides at all. And my sword is a lot more forward rather than off to the side. When you're doing this sort of thing, or even in general, shuffle footwork just simply allows you to go forwards and backwards and around without having to swap your body around each time. And a simple way to do that is, whether you're going forwards or backwards, you're extending one foot and then you're closing the other behind you. So if I'm going forwards, my front foot goes out and then I close with my rear foot. If I'm going backwards, the opposite is the case, so I extend out with my back foot and then I close with my front foot. What I do not want to do is ever cross my legs. If I ever end up in a situation where my legs are crossed around themselves, there's a moment of weakness, whether I'm doing an attack, whether I'm doing a parry or anything, whatever action I'm trying to do in that unbalanced moment, it's very poorly structured. So I won't be able to offend someone very strongly, it'll be a very poor attack and easily defended or avoided. If I'm doing some sort of defense, it'll probably collapse and I may either get struck through the defense or perhaps even just immediately fall over, which I have seen happen. So instead, what you should do is do that shuffle footwork where you extend and close, extend and close, and you're shuffling forwards and backwards and around as you see fit. Doing that kind of footwork means that even in the middle of a step, even whilst you're still moving, you are structured well enough that there is no particular moment of weakness. At the most, there may be a tiny lack of structure when one foot is lifted off the ground for a brief moment, but it has very little effect compared to crossing your legs around, where you end up very badly unstructured for far too long. After that, we've got the lunge. Now the lunge is quite simply extending a particular foot quite far forward in front of you. Whether you're doing it in more of a shuffle step, so you've got the same front foot going further forward, or you're doing it in more of a passing version where you take your back leg and then you extend it very far forwards, the concept is still the same. What you're doing is that by extending your foot quite far in front of you, you're gaining distance. But the reason why I'd recommend this instead of perhaps leaning with your body is because of the structure it has. Yes, there are certain treatises and techniques where you could viably lean forwards with your body as well, but if you're not doing it with your legs too, you're not getting as much of a reach, you're not extending as far forward if you're just using the torso. But additionally, I find you have a better structure if you remain upright as long as possible. So either extend in a lunge with your leg and your torso, so you've got a very far reach, or extend with only your legs. There are some exceptions to this, which I'll go into later with the slip, but for the most part, extending with your main torso exposes the head. You'll notice if you look at me now, if I extend forwards with my body, for the same reach of the sword, I'm making my head very vulnerable. I'm positioning it forwards and it becomes quite a vulnerable target. Whereas if I'm doing so with my legs, I'm gaining that extra reach, but I'm not making my head quite as vulnerable. Even though, of course, the leg is becoming a bit of a target. But personally, if it was a real fight, I'd rather someone injured me in my leg than in my face, you know? So with that lunge, like I said, it can be done in a passing footwork type of way or in a shuffle footwork type of way. It doesn't matter which leg you're bringing quite far forward, but what matters is whether you're extending your torso forward, whether you're keeping it upright, you've got that extension going. And I'd recommend that you don't bring your knee any further forward than your ankle. If you start extending your knee too far forward, you'll find yourself unbalanced and you'll struggle to recover again. So you can easily just drop your weight forwards as you do the lunge, but if you do it across too far with your knees, you'll find that trying to recover back again, let's say you tried an attack and then you wanted to recover when they retaliated, it's very difficult to recover back again. Or just in general, any action you do with a lunge that fails, of course you'll want to get back to where you were before. Maybe you're retreating, maybe you're just trying to recover so you can do a normal attack or defense. But if you're ending up in a situation where your knee is in front of your ankle, you'll find that not only can it be there's a potential for getting injury, that recovery is much slower. So instead, just extend out using your foot. If you want to extend out further and further, let's say you've got a lot of flexibility and you can stretch out more, then I'd recommend that you do so further with your foot rather than trying to just bring your knee further and forward. So after that, we'll be looking at the slip. Now, the slip is something I could, in its basic sense, I could explain in one sentence flat. You just close your two legs together. But the purpose is, if you're doing something like military sabre or any style really of sword fighting, you will normally have your feet maybe shoulder width apart, or if you've done a lunge, of course you're extending further out than that. But if someone was, for example, to attack your legs, you could actually find that rather than trying to parry, although I would recommend you look into the option of parrying or beating with the sword as well, a good option to avoid someone cutting at your legs is to simply close those feet together. It takes that target out of the way and avoids the attack, which means that in the meantime you have plenty of opportunity to counter with some sort of cut-off thrust immediately at them. Or if you're doing something like a parry, then if you're slipping the leg at the same time as the parry, if you're moving your leg out of the way a little bit too slowly, the parry will help as a backup plan. If your plan of doing the parry is a little bit too late, then as a backup, moving the leg out of the way is good. And even if both are a bit slow, because you're pulling the leg back, your opponent is having to still, even if it's halfway, they're still having to reach further and spend more time in the attack to reach your leg. So if you're doing both, then all of that combines and makes it a safer defense rather than just relying on the slip or just relying on the parry. It helps make it very useful. But additionally, It's also a good way to play it safe if you're doing some sort of parry. If, for example, someone is attacking directly at your head, or your torso, or somewhere else that is actually not at your legs, they could be pretending, they could be perhaps planning a follow-up, so they'll try cutting, say, your forearm, and then also cut at your legs. If you're defending both by slipping the leg and parrying in that high area, you've got both defended at the same time, and that's a beautiful thing. Rather than having to be panicking over whether your opponent is pretending and you choose to defend just your legs, or maybe you think they're actually attacking high and then you only defend your top half. Instead of worrying about all of those targets at once and where your sword should be to defend it, you just slip the leg to cover your legs and then you parry high with your sword to cover that angle as well. It's the beautiful situation where you've got both defended simultaneously, at least to some degree. Now, another tactical usage of the slip is that you actually close forwards with the slip. This is something I've done in sparring and tournaments as well, where you, instead of closing your front leg to take it out of the way, you actually close with your rear leg. This is part of a feint. Now, bearing in mind a feint is not just a pretend attack, but you're deceiving your opponent in other ways as well. You can pretend to be, you can actually be pretending you're the same distance away. Because if you close with your back leg, bearing in mind stuff like the shuffling and the lunge and the passing footwork I mentioned earlier, there's a certain degree to which, depending on your flexibility and the sort of armour you're wearing, there's a certain degree to which your body can extend. If you close your rear leg up to you, you've then gained extra distance. So you'll see, if I, for example, started in that sort of position where I'm relaxed, and then I extended in a lunge for a cut or thrust, I can stretch a certain distance. However, if I closed the rear foot and then did the lunge, I gain extra distance, even though for most of the upper part of my body, I look exactly the same. If I close my rear foot in, I don't really position my body any particularly I don't position it further forwards or back. It looks the same, even though I'm actually able to close closer to the opponent. So it can lure them into a false sense of security where they think that they're able to actually stay out of range. So it's just a normal lunge and they're far enough that they don't have to worry about your attack. But with that slip first and then the lunge, you then find that you're able to reach them when they thought they were safe, and they may either react late to the parry or maybe too late and completely just get caught by surprise and be struck. It's a beautiful thing to see and do. So, that was the footwork in sword fighting today. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, the point of the medieval genie thing is that if you have wishes, as in you wish to have certain topics like footwork, which someone requested, discussed on video, I'll be more than happy to discuss them, within reason of course, and I hope you all enjoy 2021, and have a good day. See you later.